The title of today's talk is Cannabis Terpenes, Low Volume, High Impact. And really the premise of this is to discuss some topics that I find myself thinking about and that our team is working on, and to try to introduce some new thoughts so that the greater cannabis community can begin pondering these ideas. And together I'm hoping that we can come to some more concrete answers and get to the next set of questions that we all need to be asking. So not that any of this is necessarily a absolutely fundamental brand new idea, but I'm trying to package it together in a way that we can all relate to it. So jumping right into it, the audiences I hope to speak to really are cannabis connoisseurs, product developers, and then also kind of the public education side of things. I think as a cannabis community, we need to make a real effort to make sure that we are influencing policy as it's developed. And that means making sure that the people that are regulating us, who might not actually be a part of our community, understand it to the best of their ability so that they can make regulations that actually make sense for us. So before we get into the content of everything, I just want to thank CannaCon for giving me this stage to speak on today. One of my favorite annual conferences to visit. Really excited that they're going to be branching out to Detroit and Boston this year, and I'll be at those shows as well, and hopefully this talk will be a little bit more refined at that point. I want to thank everybody on the True Terpenes team that really contributes to make it possible for me to be here today and to be speaking and focusing on things that I find enjoyable instead of the things that, the road that it took for us to get here. So, and then last two thanks directly to the man himself, Dr. Ethan Rousseau. Has spent a lot of time working with us and contributing towards our fundamental understanding of the plant and terpenes and the rest of the phytochemicals that take place in the entourage effect, and wouldn't be on this stage today without taming THC and a lot of its other work. So, and then finally, our PR consultant and the man that's really taught me how to develop my public speaking, Shango Lowe's. Shango runs Shaping Fire, which is a cannabis industry podcast. If you haven't heard of it before, I'd highly recommend listening to it. Even if it's just for the topic of terpenes, Shango interviews Dr. Rousseau twice, and they go line by line through taming THC, and they really unpack all of the content and make it accessible to a wider audience. So if you're looking to dig into terpenes and you're wondering where to start, Shaping Fire would be the podcast I would recommend listening to. From that point, you'll probably have a more solid fundamental information and be able to really start directing yourself based on your level of interest. So thanks to all those people. So the first thing, low volume, high impact. Right now within cannabis and within terpenes, we're starting to learn some rather complex names. If you take a look at how long it took for the greater industry to start to understand the therapeutic value of THC and CBD, the idea of adding several hundred more compounds to that matrix is a little bit alarming, because the general public, these are complex compound names. The name alpha caryophyllene or beta caryophyllene doesn't necessarily roll off the tongue for most people. So what I really want to get across with this section here is that we're learning the most common terpenes, but the most common terpenes aren't necessarily the ones that are of greatest interest. And by that I mean the reason why you enjoy your favorite strain probably isn't because it's dominant in limonene. It's probably because there's a trace terpene that's found within it that's very unique, whether it's the pharmacological effect that it has or the olfactory flavor and aroma. The quantity of a substance doesn't necessarily determine its pungency or its pharmacological activity. So it's these trace elements. Right now, I think in Washington we have Confidence Analytical, thank goodness. They test to, I think, about 50 compounds or so, which is, as far as the cannabis industry is concerned, top of the line. I don't know of another lab in the United States that tests for more within the cannabis space. And that data is really useful for people that are looking to make progress on product development and matching strains to specific health conditions. So So just keep in mind, just because there's a lot of something doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to be, it's that compound is responsible for the effects that we're after. So I'll use an example here. As a company, we recreate cannabis strain profiles by extracting terpenes out of botanical sources and formulating them in ratios so that they match what you would find on the analytics from a cannabis strain. We do a strain called blue cheese, and if you open our bottle of blue cheese, the first thing that you're hit with is kind of like a dirty gym sock type smell, and it comes from a terpene called isolaveric acid. And if you were to look at the analytics on our profile, the isolaveric acid is about a 1,000th of the profile, but it's the first thing to come out of the bottle when you smell it. It's the first thing that you taste, and it has a very unique effect. That just being kind of a concrete example. And if you take into mind this low volume, high impact concept, it actually kind of leads into why I believe personally that cannabis has so much aptitude and so much diversity as to what it can treat. And it's because it's a plant that contains a wide variety of different pharmacological compounds, whether they're terpenes or other classes of chemicals, in very small amounts. You know, the overall essential oil content of cannabis from volatile compound standpoint might be as high as 10%. I think industry average is probably closer to like 3 to 5%, but it's relatively low essential oil content in comparison to plants like lavender or like a eucalyptus or things along those lines. So what that translates into is cannabis isn't a plant that you can easily approach toxicity with. Not to say that it's never happened, and that with concentration that we're not more likely to approach those sorts of things, but by and large, cannabis has many different compounds in small amounts, and that really kind of leads into what is the entourage effect. You know, people have heard it's synergy. We've heard that it's many different things come together. 1 + 1 = 3. But kind of the way that I like to describe it is, it's using this whole plant that currently we're not able to completely quantify. We're not able to, with our current methods, you know, if you go to advanced botanical labs from like the nutraceutical space or the pharmaceutical space, you get a lot closer to this thing. But within cannabis, within our labs that we're regularly testing with, we're not identifying all of the compounds that are found within the plant. And because we're not identifying everything, we're not aware of the entire matrix that we're dealing with when we consume it. So the compounds that we are aware of, you know, we're isolating pretty rapidly. We're doing THCA, we're getting THC distillate, we're doing delta 8 and delta 9, we've got CBD isolate, we've got, you know, so we're making headway and rapidly. We've got a lot of the industry leaders as far as equipment and the people that are running those machines here today, and that isolation leads to the ability to standardize things, which is great. It's a step towards the pharmacological route of things, but when we look at the reason why most of the people in this room are here today, it's much more closely related to whole plant. It's the fact that we consume it in one way or another, and it's positively impacted us. And so I'm a proponent for both, really. I think we need to take pharmacological methods for standardization, and we need to try to get as close as we possibly can to a diverse or really I guess I'd use the word chemotype within our medicine. So just to kind of wrap up this point and go to the next one, just remember that the terpene that you see on the lab result at the dispensary, or when you get yours back from your grow, when you submitted a sample and you see that it's high in myrcene, that's not the most important thing that's going on. It's certainly an important indicator, and you can learn a lot of things from the top 10 or top 20, but you know, that you might see 50 terpenes on your test, but there's probably 150 actually in the sample. So we need to continue to expand upon what we're actually analyzing and begin to learn more and more about those trace elements. And kind of related to this topic is that essential oils are complex mixtures of what's known as secondary plant metabolites. And a secondary plant metabolite is produced by plants for not the purpose of growth or photosynthesis or reproduction, other like primary type functions, but for the way that the plant relates with its environment. Most of these chemicals are present because the plant needs to be able to attract beneficial relationships, or such as, let's say, bringing a pollinator in to interact and spread pollen and basically progenate, which is, at the root and the heart of evolution itself. Things are trying to evolve and pass on and continue to grow. Or it needs to detour something, or it needs to protect itself from whether it's an insecticidal or a microbiological threat, whether that's fungus or that's any of the types of things that we need to deal with in our grow room, whether it's an aphid approaching limonene and having its exoskeleton melt away, or it's another thing that I think of that was kind of inspired by Rob Clark's marijuana evolution and ethnobotany is the idea that humans took cannabis out of these mountainous regions or out of these jungle valleys, and we moved around with it for basically as long as we've probably been standing on 2 feet. And the aromas and the the visual appeal of these plants is a big reason why we selected the ones that we carried around with us. And you talk about a beneficial relationship. If you've ever taken a bud off the plant and put it in your mouth, it's not really a pleasant experience. But at the end of that plant's life, once it's went through sustenance and it's passed away and it's dropped its seeds or it's done whatever it's going to do if it hasn't been pollinated, the monoterpenes evaporate off and the chlorophyll begins to leave as well. It becomes much more palatable and it becomes usable, and the scent actually increases. So as a beneficial relationship, this plant is beautiful, and it is very, I think early humans quickly found out that the seeds were nutritious and tasty, and so we brought it along with us. And because of the way that the plant grows through that flowering cycle, it was in our best interest to make sure that it could go through its entire life cycle before we got to use it. So think of terpenes as really influencers in their environment. Another way to put it is that terpenes can be classified as hormones or pheromones. And so a hormone is when you're producing a chemical within you that's communicating from one system to another. And a pheromone is very similar, but it's communicating from one organism to another. And so these are communication molecules. There was a study that came out of one of the Nordic countries, I can't remember which one, if it was Sweden or Norway or whatnot, in 2017, and it was focused on how fungus and bacteria communicate with one another. And it was stated that because they found that terpenes were involved in this relationship, that terpene was actually the most spoken language on the planet because of the number of participants, in the trillions or larger, I'd imagine. But so just think, why are these chemicals present? They're not there to make sure that the plant can grow and develop. They're not lipids, they're not proteins, they're not carbohydrates, they're byproducts thereof. And for a long time, people thought that they were just that. Sorry, byproduct's the wrong word. Maybe co-product would be a better word. And until I believe it was the 1940s, people really just believed that these were byproducts, like they were scents the plant was trying to grow, but they really didn't have much of a purpose. And that started to change around the 1940s. I'd imagine maybe with the rise and advent of aromatherapy. There's some other experts here today that can probably speak a little bit further to that. But as far as I know, secondary plant metabolites are really the reason why we enjoy most of the plants that we enjoy. It's their scent, it's their flavor. I wanted to go through just a couple classes of them. I think people will recognize some of them and realize that they might know a little bit more than you actually think you do. And those basically are the secondary plant metabolites. You have nitrogen-containing metabolites, specifically alkaloids, which most variety of illicit drugs outside of cannabis, or rather cannabinoids, that we recreationally consume fall into the classification of alkaloids. There are the terpenoids, which there's a number of. If you wanted to get really technical, you could decide that all the cannabinoids are actually terpenes or terpenoids as well. I think if there's any established organic chemists in here, they'd tell me that there's a better way to classify that, and that's why we don't call them that. There's probably names that more specifically relate to it, but if you got technical, you can actually see that cannabinoids are terpenes. The ones that we interact with and the names that we're talking about mostly in cannabis right now are monoterpenoids and terpenes and sesquiterpenes and terpenoids. A really easy way to remember kind of the hierarchy of them is that sesquiterpenoid is a much longer word than mono. Easier to say. They are heavier. As maybe as a quick and fast rule, but maybe not a law, we would say that they contribute to flavor on a greater level than the monoterpenoids do. When I think of monoterpene, what I think of is the lights coming on in a grow room, and as the scent begins to rise, and it goes from like a green smell to a very fresh, almost essential oil-like scent. Or if you're out on the hill and same thing happens, you're out there in the morning dew, and then all of a sudden the sun starts to rise, and the scent and the aroma comes, and the wind comes in, and you're kind of taken away by it. And we all have friends, or maybe people in this room have spent a significant amount of time in a grow room, and you walk away and you feel benefited from that time that you spent from the plants. Part of that's probably the fact that we're focusing on our work, and it's like meditation-like. But at the same time, it's pretty hard to deny the fact that we've been in a room breathing in pharmacologically active, I'd say, infused air. So, and that's actually, people often ask, how should we be consuming these, or what's the best way to be consuming these? And from an evolutionary standpoint, through your nose is the way that we developed, actually. Like I said, it's communication data. So as humans, we've really, pardon me, we've moved away from our relying so heavily on our sense of smell, but there's still some things that trigger us, and you could probably take this to another level if you think about it, but it's like when you smell fire, you know danger, and your nose indicated that for you. And, you got sensory data, you might not be able to see it or be aware of it in any other fashion, but something's going on. And very similarly, when we used to be a little bit more adept to using our sense of smell, I imagine it led us to food and to water and away from danger. And so as humans, really, we're doing aromatherapy, and we're consuming terpenes in one of the most available fashions when we're inhaling it, whether it be through smoking. I prefer vaporization personally, so it really is the best method. And then probably, and again, there's we can dive into and find some greater experts on this sort of thing. But then probably through topical application, being that it has a pretty direct route to getting into our blood, because these are carrier-like molecules. They really easily go through the skin and go into our fat, and then are carried into the blood. And then the format that we need to probably be most careful about is actually the oral consumption side of things. Anybody that's familiar with aromatherapy knows that you can't just go and consume any oil just because it smells good. Terpenes are further purified. If you want to think of where these are coming from, you could go and you can distill a lavender oil, and that's the equivalent of a whole plant essential oil. And then if you were to take that lavender oil and put it into a fractional distillation setup, like any one that you could buy from a number of glass vendors here today, you're able to distill other compounds out of that, such as linalool, or let's say camphene is also, I believe, found in trace amounts in lavender as well. And so terpenes are, I usually tell people it's a pretty good rule to follow the safety standards of essential oils when working with terpenes. But again, that's not necessarily a law of it, but it's going to likely keep you mostly safe. And it's not the terpenes on the oral consumption side that are quite as hazardous. In most cases, there's definitely some exceptions, so don't just go and start consuming things without really looking into it. But I like to just make the point that inhalation really is the way to go about these. So like at our booth, if you've seen up in the front over here, we have those essential oil diffusers running. Myself, maybe 5-6 years ago, I would have thought that was something that was nice smelling, but really didn't have much of a real benefit. Today, I absolutely believe in it. We're putting these volatile chemicals that are known for all sorts of positive beneficial kind of therapeutic-like qualities. A lot of them are antifungal, antibacterial, antimicrobial. We're putting them in the air. They're falling on surfaces all around us. There's quite a bit of scientific literature that speaks to the effect of these compounds. So definitely inhalation of terpenes is the way to go. So jumping into something that I think people will find controversial, but also I'm just trying to start us down this path. I hope somebody can improvise on it, like I'm improvising on the ideas that I found. and it's the terpene superclasses is the concept. Dr. Rousseau proposed this in a 2017 paper titled Cannabis Pharmacology, the Usual Suspects and a Few Promising Leads. And basically what he was able to do through some analysis was break down a pretty large number. I don't know the number, I know it was in the thousands, but he was able to take some analytical data from a testing lab, and he was able to separate the samples into 8 different classifications. And he basically said there are strains that are dominant in myrcene, terpinolene, ocimene, limonene, pinene, humulene, linalool, and beta-caryophyllene. And what he said was these are very distinct chemotypes. Chemotype meaning the chemical profile that the plant produces. So, and forgive me for maybe over-explaining, but I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. You have a genotype, which is actually the genetic profile of a plant. You have the phenotype, which is the physical expression of that genotype. It has everything to do with the inputs, the environment, and the really the schedule, the lighting schedule, the spectrum of light. All these sorts of things contribute to how the genetics are expressed. And then the final piece of that is the chemotype, which is what are the chemicals that physical expression has created. And so what can be influenced is how much terpene is present. Terpene or cannabis itself is an herb, so just like many other herbs, a lot of times, by over-coddling it, you really don't give it a chance to express itself to its fullest potential. And so basically what he was saying is he proposed something that I think the scientific community could really embrace, but as I said earlier with the THC and CBD, look how long it took for the general population to really absorb that information and be able to walk into a dispensary and use it. Adding even 8 more variables to that situation is going to take a few years probably. There's a graduate student out of Canada named Felipe Henry, and he took that same data that Dr. Rousseau crunched, and he simplified it, and so we had Dr. Rousseau called it terpene superclasses. This gentleman called it terpene hyperclasses, and he broke it down into 3 separate terpenes, which are beta-caryophyllene, back up here. It is terpinolene, limonene, and myrcene as the dominants. He found about 85% adherence to this law, to this rule. So again, it's not a law, but it serves the general purpose, and it's actually specific, and it has the ability, it's verifiable. It's not just indica sativa hybrid and kind of a grab bag as to what effect are you actually going to receive from this hybrid strain that's in front of you. I'm actually a fan of this, and what I hope that this leads to, I think this is like a 3 to 5 year goal probably, but I'd like, we have the THC and CBD side of things. There's 168, maybe more known cannabinoids at this point, so obviously terpenes are not the entire picture, but as of right now, I'd really hope that we can get our general patient and consumer population to the point where they can walk into a store and they can say, I like 1-to-1 strains that are high in myrcene, or I need to avoid things that have terpinolene. And that would be the next evolution, I feel like, within the dispensary space, and getting people aware of what it is that they're looking for. And then, part of that is teaching people what are those scents. So whether the analytics are available or not, teaching people to identify what it is that they find to be beneficial, and then also what really gets you going, what's exciting to you. When you walk in and you smell something, what really piques your interest, basically. So I think it's both. We want people to enjoy cannabis. I think that's one of the cool things that it presents over a pharmaceutical option, is that most of us, or many of us, enjoy it, whether it's because it's an olfactory and flavor and scent experience, or because it's not another pill to take. A lot of people get excited about the fact that they're consuming cannabis, and I think that we could take that to the next level if we can improve the likelihood that somebody chooses something that's going to benefit them. And then something that I think is notable that is another system of classification that I think potentially could replace indica sativa hybrid because, again, it's at least a little bit more descript and but it's not quite as scientific. And this was proposed by Kevin Jodrey, and he throws a light depth competition in Humboldt County every year. And some of the best cannabis that I ever get the opportunity to consume every year comes out of that competition. And they break down the entries into fruit, fuel, earth, and floral entries. And they really encourage everybody to try and choose, kind of along the same lines, which one benefits you and which one do you love to consume. And I think that that's a closer, if we were really able to decide, which terpenes comprise this, we would then be able to go to the consumer level and we'd be able to label things. Oh, linalool is floral, and oh, earthy, we've got myrcene and beta-caryophyllene. And so that people could at least walk in and then say, I need something that's earthy, that's what really brings me down, or floral is what I like to use before I go to bed, that sort of thing. So again, I kind of find that to be a halfway point between indica and sativa and hybrid, which really relies on the phenotype of a plant, the physical expression. We're looking at the shape of the leaves and the branching and whatnot and trying to determine what the chemotype is that comes off of that. And it's really not a reliable system, as most of us know. Want to talk about a few different advances in terpene science that True Terpenes is working on right now, all stages of production, and building some data that we're going to plan on open sourcing to the community. And basically what that is we're following a variety of different genotypes and phenotypes through full stage, basically from the day that it enters into flowering, through every route of extraction, through different time frames of curing, and we're mapping how do the terpenes develop, when are they at their peak, what form of extraction best preserves them, what form of extraction destroys them, and basically going to map and put together that data so that people can begin to manufacture with a better set of, or really a better understanding of what it is that they're doing to manipulate the cannabis in front of them. So that's something I'm really excited to have. Just a couple examples is we'll be doing, we'll take the same plant material and we'll put it through CO2, ethanol, butane, propane, ice water, dry sieve, and hand methods. We'll do it with wet, fresh frozen, dry, cured, degraded, decarboxylated, 1-year-old and 2-year-old material. And then we'll be testing it pre-harvest, harvest, day 1, day 3, day 7, day 14, 30, 90, 1 year, and compiling all of that data into infographics and then an actual published research report that people can begin to circulate and ponder over. And again, like I said, we really view ourselves as the ones that are asking the questions now, but we're hoping to inspire others to really help us push this forward, because it really is a monumental task to unlock the secrets within this plant, fully understand them, and then apply them to human health and enjoyment. So that's one thing. The next thing is we've just invested in a GCMS and a rather large library of standards. And this particular GCMS is used for testing on hydrocarbons. It has lower temperatures and some fun toys on it that really make it ideal for analyzing these sorts of compounds. Right now we've been using machinery by and large that's specific for cannabinoids, which are non-volatile, meaning that they can tolerate higher temperatures before degradation. And that leads us to getting inaccurate results when we're doing testing, because a lot of these compounds degrade the second they touch the machine, and it just doesn't really allow us to have the full picture. And so that's actually called a MGGC-MSO, which stands for Multidimensional Gas Chromatography Mass Spectrometer Olfactometer. So mouthful, I'm not going to repeat it again, thank you. But it also allows for sufficient resolution and the ability to separate coalitions of 2 or more compounds, which basically allows us to stretch things out. The thing about terpenes is many of them are so like one another that they test, and when they read out on a chromatogram, they're hidden in the same peak. So you only see one thing, but there might be 20 things that it actually detected at that same time. So this particular machine, I want to make sure I say it right here. This particular machine has two inline columns. One of them is polar and one of them is non-polar, and it allows you to analyze everything that passes through it from two perspectives, which really allows you to kind of see it in a 3D format rather than just one-dimensional. So really excited about doing that. We'll be opening ourselves up to public testing to allow growers to submit samples and get additional data. With that, we're going to be teaming up with Phylos Bioscience and contributing towards the strain universe chemotypic data. So people that are getting their plants profiled and learning more about the genetics will be able to go to the next step and also know about the chemotype. And what we hope to do is pair that to the end user so that when somebody purchases a Phylos certified strain, they know exactly which genetic profile it is that they're purchasing. And in fact, if they found relief from that, they can go back and they can see the exact chemotype of what it was that they had consumed at a level that's never been available before. So we're really excited about that. We'll be teaming up with Pure Analytics in California, and we're in negotiation with a couple people here in Washington as well. We'll be doing it ourselves in Oregon. So the West Coast will be covered for that particular measure. Something else that we're just about to get into is we're going to be mapping with an EEG brain activity with different isolated terpenes to begin to try to get a greater understanding of what's going on with the most common terpenes, just from a very kind of surface level. But we'll be handing that data off to a couple of neurologists that have decided that they want to work with us and have quite a bit of experience in reading that sort of information. So we're hoping to release something in late 2018 about that as well. And then finally, we've had the opportunity to find a man that is considered within the essential oil analytical chemistry space one of the very, very top minds and brightest. He's been working in that space for about 40 years. And he's also a pharmacognosist, which is a specific form of really, I guess it's what Dr. Rousseau is as well. But it's somebody that's focused on using plant medicine for human health. So deriving natural plant medicines and using them in a clinical application. And we're going to basically be creating, this gentleman can look at an essential oil readout from like a high-end lab that does more than terpenes, that does really all the other secondary plant metabolites, and in a matter of minutes can really give you a pretty solid, educated opinion on what the effects of that and the benefit of that strain will be on a variety of different health conditions. So we'll be taking the knowledge that he's been applying. He was involved with doTERRA and Young Living and many other companies. We'll be taking that knowledge of analytical chemistry and putting together a system for influencers like the people in this room to begin to understand greater about what's going on in cannabis in front of you. So that's another late 2018, maybe early 2019 release, but that's what also is on the way. So to bring up a name that I mentioned earlier, Kevin Jodrey, I think another reason you guys should check out Shango Lowe's, just we collaborate a lot, and a lot of what we end up talking about ends up on the podcast. And so he's actually promoted this material if you're looking for it. So if you do check out Shape and Fire, you'd be able to find this as well. And Kevin's a cultivator from the Emerald Triangle that's been involved with a lot of the development and production of many of your favorite strains. I don't want to go into a list of them, but a lot of the big names have come off of his farm or started off his farm and were taken to somebody else's breeding project. And he's been talking about recently a lot of varieties that were lost in the late 80s and early 90s from that region of the world, and probably all up and down the West Coast from increased drug enforcement efforts. And a lot of unique chemical chemotype profiles were lost because this was pre-carbon filtering. And because we didn't have carbon filtering, we really didn't have the ability to control our smell. And a lot of those scents that were just unmanageable led to people being prosecuted. And through that prosecution, these genetics were lost. And so, there's stories of all sorts of seeds in the back of drawers and that sort of thing. And so a lot of them are people are working towards getting these varieties back, but due to law enforcement efforts in the late 80s and early 90s, we lost a lot of the breeding stock, a lot of the indigenous landrace varieties that were brought back from all over the world and cultivated in California were lost. And then due to the advent of Dutch genetics really taking hold, the Kushes and like the strong hazes that were developed and whatnot, a lot of these genetics were taken back to where those indigenous plants were and have proliferated. And so the indigenous plant species are really no longer in existence or are only found in trace, kind of hidden back valleys and whatnot. So if you want to learn more about that topic, what happened to the cannabis that you used to smoke 20 years ago type of thing, Kevin's got a lot to say about that, and he's got a number of really, really skilled breeders that are working on trying to progenate strains like that, guys that are familiar with the flavors that used to be there, and that's a really exciting thing. And then what I'm often asked is how to start learning more about this sort of thing. How did we do it? And I would say, go out and get every cannabis textbook that you possibly can. Some of my most fundamental ideas come from Rob Clark. Marijuana Evolution and Ethnobotany is probably one of the greatest books I've ever read. So I really highly recommend that one. And something that I do on the regular, and it makes my email inbox look disastrous, but I have Google Alerts set up on the word terpenes and every single terpene that I'm aware of and all of the big companies that work within it. And I spend a lot of time crunching through what comes up through that. And I would highly recommend that to anybody that's looking for it. You don't have to go out and Google every day. It just ends up showing up in your inbox every day, and you can pan through them real quick. Another transferable skill is learning more about aromatherapy, which is a little bit more publicly developed and organized. And so I recommend people look at university programs like what's offered at Bastyr or a number of other places. There's some Ayurvedic institutes that do the same. But taking that information that you learn from there, or from any sort of botanical experience that you have the opportunity to encounter, it really just opens up your mind to the fact you're not specializing on cannabis and trying to learn about cannabis, you're learning about plants, and because you know more about plants, you understand more about cannabis. So, pardon me, I would really highly recommend that. I wanted to list off a couple of notable names of people that I look up to, that I follow, and when they speak I listen, and I try to make sure I read everything they write. Specifically, in no specific, sorry, I used that word 3 times in the same sentence, in no particular order, Jeff Raber, I really look up to for product development in the United States specifically. His organization, The Workshop's, really been leading the way in the public cannabis space, I think probably going on about 4.5 or 5 years at this point. So whenever Jeff speaks, I try to be there. Ethan Rousseau, obviously, as I've mentioned, he's got a number of scholarly research articles available, starting with Taming THC. I think there's probably 5 really strong papers that anybody that is really trying to understand these concepts really should look into. If you just do a quick search for Ethan Rousseau scholarly articles, you'll find everything you'd like. Somebody that he writes with frequently, Jahan Marcoux, is definitely an up-and-coming researcher from within this space. He doesn't get mentioned very often, but I really look up to his work as well. He's done a lot of the legwork and the deep research in some of those papers with Ethan, and so definitely a notable and respectable individual. As far as in the analytical space, laboratories that have been focusing on these sorts of things and asking questions, Samantha Miller from Pure Analytics in Northern California, really highly respectable. Whether people were asking her to or not, she's been terpene testing just about every single sample that came through her lab for the last 4 or 5 years, and really just pushing the envelope, and has a very professionally run analytical lab that I'm really excited to push forward and work with more. Eden Labs, their CO2 extraction, their 20-liter CO2 extractor is probably my favorite way to extract cannabis-derived terpenes subcritically, which leads to, in my opinion, the most flavorful and aromatic experience. If you stop by our booth, which is up front, number 901, we have purple train wreck infused ice cubes. Really highly recommend everybody stop by. It's basically the flavor of taking a dab without having to get so stoned. You just put it in your mouth, you breathe in the mouth and out the nose, and it really blooms as it warms. It's a really nice aromatic experience. As I mentioned already, Phylos Bioscience, I think, is really a thread in a lot of the greatest cultivators and analytical labs, and just they work really closely with some of the greatest minds within cannabis that are asking the right questions and going about things in a very scientific manner. If you're not familiar with what they do, it's PHYLOS. Look them up. They're out of Portland, Oregon. Really strong organization. And then from kind of an international stage, organizations that I think are actually leading the space within terpenes, and I don't think many could disagree, is Botanical out of Israel. They are the parent company that has Tikka Malam and Abna and several other of the kind of large Israeli names that people are familiar with. And they are running right now a 2,000 participant clinical trial using various formulations of cannabis and non-cannabis derived terpenes in application to clinical medical conditions. And their end goal is to develop terpene formulations to treat I believe it was 11 or 13 of the major diseases that plague the world right now, and they're probably the closest to having a real understanding of how to use these in a therapeutic application. I'm going to CannaTech in March and really hoping to tighten up that collaboration as we've been in talks. So Bazelet, B-A-Z-E-L-E-T, great organization. They're poised right now. I believe they serve 10,000 patients right now in Israel. They're building a GMP facility that'll be able to serve 100,000, and really just setting the standard worldwide for what cannabis cultivation can look like for a clinical side. It's certainly not the answer to everybody's solution. I don't want to move away from a craft market for a lot of reasons, but when we're talking about treating the greatest plagues on our metabolic conditions and our cancers and other conditions along those lines, I think the pharmaceutical approach is definitely has positive benefits. So that's really the ideas that I've put together for today. And like I said, I didn't want to give everybody kind of the same boilerplate that we've heard over and over again, kind of a reiteration of Dr. Rousseau's work. So if anybody has any questions after this, or I have a limited number of our education kits here, and just to show everybody what it is real quick. It basically just has the primary 6 terpenes inside of it, and I didn't bring the cards, so you got to stop by our booth and get some ice and pick one up. But it's got a little index card with it as well to give you some just kind of talking points about each one, its scent, where it's derived from, what people say of its effects, etc. So I've got these little kits. If anybody wants to come up and grab one that doesn't have one already, please feel free to. I think I have about a dozen. Other than that, if there's any questions, or I think we have about 5 minutes here. So if anybody wants to bring up a question or pose an idea, I'd love to hear it. Otherwise, we can call it a day. Please, look for it.
I know that towards the beginning you talked about how you create the terpene profiles from specific strains. When you're dealing with things that have such a amount of effect at trace amounts, how is it that you're getting that full profile?
So we're not replicating cannabis identically, or even close to it. I'd say we might be doing a quarter of it. So what I like to say is, we're a business-to-business company primarily, and to compare cannabis-derived terpenes to botanically derived terpenes is, like I said, it's about 25% of the accuracy. So what I usually, the way that people are using terpenes commercially is they're using them to usually thin the viscosity of oils to make them function in a pen, or to add flavor, fragrance, and aroma to an edible or a topical type tincture or preparation. And so I say, they're incomparable. So what we're actually comparing it to is like a propylene glycol or an MCT. They're taking the place of that product. But yeah, we're not completely replicating them. And one reason is because, like I said before, the labs that are actually willing to work with cannabis are only identifying a certain subset of the chemicals that are there. And so we can only recreate what we actually know is there. And then to a certain degree, some of those compounds are difficult to extract from other plants and to derive. They're either very volatile and they degrade easily, or they're found in such trace amounts that we're talking about like literal hundreds of tons of plant material to derive any sort of like commercially viable source of it. So, we consider ourselves the next best thing, but certainly no replacement for cannabis. Front row, and then I'll go to you, sir.
So yesterday I was at the talk that was actually in this room about cannabis as medicine, and we talked about aromatherapy for seizures, because the woman said that she had experienced with her daughter that when she was about having a seizure and she needed to get the oil, one time she dropped it just like near the nose, and just the aroma of those terpenes were able to get her out of it, and it happened a few times. So even though you're saying only a quarter of the cannabis, but how do you feel it works in that side?
What we're proud of with what we do is consistency and quality. And so I believe wholeheartedly that, that happens, just so people in the back of the room can hear. She said that there was a woman, she was speaking?
Yeah, yesterday.
Okay. Yeah. Say it again. Oh, and we have the man himself who cultivated the flower here. Yeah. So somebody was speaking from the podium yesterday and has a child who was stopped from a seizure due to the application of essential oil basically on the lip here. Just the aroma itself seemed to have a profound effect. And, that's what we're selling with our brand is consistency. Not this is cannabis, it's better than cannabis, it's half as good as cannabis. It's does this work for your health condition? Because great, if it does, I'll sell it to you for the next 20 years and it'll always be the same thing. So if using THC distillate and CBD isolate and terpenes allows you to find relief, we can ensure that it's always available to you. So yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
I guess my question was really like, if you knew what those terpenes are, could you create it with botanical terpenes and it would work just the same?
I don't know that I can say it as a blanket statement, but if let's just say that the terpenes were identified and they're all things that were commercially available, it is just difficult to say that we're actually identifying everything at this point. But yeah, I hope to move. That's what we're trying to move closer to every day. Yeah. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that a variety of constituents of plants have similar psychographic activity. Have they gone to other forms of analysis of NMR?
Yeah, I asked that question recently. I had asked I asked this gentleman that I had mentioned, this analytical chemist, about. Oh yeah, absolutely. You want to put that right there. I asked this gentleman about using NMR in analysis, and he told me, and again, I'm certainly no chemist. He told me that NMR was not the ideal form for testing organic structures specifically. And like I don't know very much about the technology myself, but it was his impression that relying on GCMS and with this particular arrangement of polar and non-polar columns would be the best way to go about it. So that's about all I know about the NMR application.
We would rely on that for identification of unknowns in organic lab.
Okay. Yeah, it's not something that I'm educated on. Yeah. Oh yeah, actually, this gentleman right here can probably tell you everything about that. He's very educated on that.
The answer is yes.
Yeah. You got Yeah, of course. So, I want to thank everybody for coming today. The kids are going quick, but come up and grab one if you like one.